friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be building Wonderland in the ever after of Storybook Vale. This is going to serve as the fitting home for the Cheshire Cat, who recently just graced us with his presence not too long ago, and I wanted to create a forest that was just as confusing, windy, and whimsical as the movie, so I hope you guys follow along and enjoy the process. This is going to be the first part of my Alice in Wonderland build series, so there is still so much more I want to do with all of the Alice items. Part 2 will be released sometime soon with the Mad Hatter house, which you will see very briefly in this video, so definitely tune in and expect part 2 soon. Without further ado, let's create a Wonderland forest. Starting off, we have Cheshire's tree in the center of the wild woods. So I'm choosing to put the forest in the wild woods because I do plan on using the Teapot Falls for the Red Queen's castle, and there's a little section in this area where I'm gonna be putting Mad Hatter's house. So this entire space, which is surprisingly big, not going to lie, is going to serve as our wonderful forest. So just to begin with, we are making a roundabout, and I always struggled with the roundabouts, but the way I'm doing it is I made a square at first, and then I'm just sort of carving out the edges and also in the center and just trying to make it look like a circle. Now where there is a flat base, I'm going to start making my first winding path. Now again, just like I said in my last video, I do have a video on how to make a winding path, which is going to serve as pretty much the foundation for this entire build. Basically, I decided that I was just going to make the path and let it choose my placement for all the rest of the items. And so I did not go into this with a specific plan. I just started making paths basically. And you're going to see it's going to have a lot of twists and turns. Right now, I'm just kind of making it so that it leads into the other entrances and exits. And so I'm making this one right here, which is going to lead to the Mad Hatter area. Making this path is pretty straightforward. However, I have a more detailed explanation on why I do the way I do it. And so if you would like to check out that video, it's pretty simple, and I have a beginner and intermediate, and we will just keep going with the pathing. So honestly, I'm just letting the path choose me instead of me choosing the path. So now I am just making a bunch of diverting paths, and you're gonna see that some of these paths will connect into these little like imperfect roundabout situations, and those are going to serve as our tree clusters. And so you're going to think that when you first see this build, you'll probably think that there's a lot of items in use, which true, there are a lot of little items in use like the mome raths and everything else. But in terms of the trees, I'm actually saving more item space by using the bigger tree clusters, and so that is going to go in between a lot of these spaces. I'm making a little pathway just to curve into this corner, and that is where I'm going to be putting my crafting and cooking station because I think there is some functionality to it, just having those things in hand at every biome so that you don't have to run around. So I am making the paths kind of blindly, but I am also trying to definitely make sure that the spaces are big enough because the tree clusters can get a little thick, if you know what I mean. So in this corner over here, I'm making a much bigger roundabout area, and then this is honestly just more of a filler space. But if you watched my walkthrough in my Forgotten Lands where I made an Alice themed Forgotten Lands area. This was before the update, and so I did not have a lot of the same items that we have in this update, but I am basically recycling some of my older ideas, and one of them was having a very glowy and just honestly like lagoon-esque type of home for the blue caterpillar. And of course that's not a character in the game, so I'm using that in-game item that we get from the premium shop where we just have the blue caterpillar perched on that mushroom. And so this is going to be his home along with a lot of the singing flowers. And so I'm just kind of making a cove over here and trying to lead these paths straight into that roundabout. Now the way I make the paths is very like formulated, however you're gonna see that I'm doing some eyeballing just to make sure it looks right, because there are gonna be some imperfections here and there, and you're gonna have to make your judgment on like, you know, whether this will connect and like what to delete. And so I'm kind of going off script with the pathing situation, but it all works out. So now I'm going to start putting my tree clusters down, and I primarily use these purple trees because you will see later in a second, but these trees are amazing. And the reason why I use them is because I wanted to make it so that we had a proper light source in the nighttime without using a lot of like visible lights. So they're invisible in a type of way. I also combine a lot of the bind trees, and my reasoning for that was that Cheshire's tree is very red, as you can see, and I just thought it would look very out of place in a forest of like blue and purple, and so I'm kind of sprinkling here and there some bind trees and bushes later on, and that's just to kind of like make it seem more in place, because like that's like the closest tree I can get to Cheshire's, which honestly doesn't come too close, but it kind of blends seamlessly, surprisingly. I actually like the way that the oranges look in this biome. I mostly use the tree clusters, however there are just a couple like individual trees and mushrooms that I place down for some filler space, but overall I'm kind of just going with the flow, trying to make these work with the spaces that I created with the pathing, and sometimes they fit perfectly, other times they kind of cut into the path. You just want to be careful to not make the path too skinny, otherwise it's pretty much unwalkable. However, I got pretty lucky with the placement, and so I am just placing everything accordingly. So what I'm doing, and what I mentioned before with these tree clusters, is that you can actually place these wrought iron lights inside the mushrooms. It's actually really crazy, and I love this because it basically makes the light invisible during the day, and then during the night you see the glow but you don't see the lamp, and I think it's a game changer. It does work with only the purple, blue, and green lights. It doesn't work with the yellow light, unfortunately, and I found out that it only works with this very specific tree cluster, so the other mushroom ones, it's not gonna work that way. But basically what I'm doing is I am putting the purple wrought iron lights inside of the pink mushrooms and the blue ones inside of the blue ones. And honestly, during the night, it actually creates this really beautiful glow, and it also provides a natural light source. So I'm going to just now start decorating with the smaller foliage. So I combined the ever after bushes and the bind bushes, and I think I got this idea when I got back into the Alice in Wonderland realm. I noticed there was a lot of like random orange and red, and it kind of just matches Cheshire's tree. So I'm just gonna sprinkle a couple of these bind bushes, and I think it just adds a pop of color because this biome is very predominantly blue and purple, and so it just adds a little good contrast. I'm using a lot of other foliage, both from the Storybook Vale and Eternity Isle, and so one thing to note with these glowing ones in particular, the blue ones, and then there's also the glowing mushrooms, so I would recommend putting those in the tree clusters or nearby the tree clusters that don't have the wrought iron lights. So I'm talking any of those tree clusters that are like normal or they don't have the purple tree. And I'm just going to switch to evening here. You should do this in the evening time so you can see what the light looks like in your build. And I placed a lot of these mushrooms nearby those clusters because those ones don't get the light from the wrought iron lights. And so just to kind of balance out the light ratio, we kind of just put those around there so that it still looks bright without it being like a really patch of darkness and then there's like a bright one next to it. And so, yeah. Using a couple of Eternity Isle foliage, I think we're just going to sprinkle it here and there, a little razzle dazzle, if you will. And so these blue ones kind of fit perfectly in with the biome. And then I also use the Ancient's Landing one, I think. It's like the purple shag looking one. Those also look very whimsical to me. And so I'm just like, why not? Let's put it there. And now for one of my favorite parts, we're going to be putting the mome raths. Yes. So in the realm, there's a lot of mome raths just kind of sticking in the path. And so I'm kind of just being random with it, but also kind of keeping it more towards the borders of the pathing. You will see me here and there put some in the middle of the pathing. However, it's going to predominantly be towards the edges, and that's just so it doesn't look so cluttered in the path. One thing I really like about this specific path structure is that it's wide enough to make it seem like not too cluttered, but it also is like the perfect size basically, and so I don't want to overcrowd it with the mome raths. And one thing I noticed from my observation in the realm was that there are some singular patches and then there are some clustered patches, and so by Cheshire's tree I'm gonna just cluster them a little more. So over here, I'm kind of finishing up my crafting station area, and I'm using that pergola tree shed thingy. I know it's kind of hard to get by in Scrooge, but I happen to have the orange one that fit the other trees in the area. So I was like, you know what, just to fill up some space, I'm going to put that. And then I'm just going to put my crafting table down and my cooking station, and that way I have something very functional in this build. to the Blue Caterpillar's Cove, I'm going to be adding some of these water fountains or these waterfalls because I just think like, I don't know, it just needs water, you know. There is a waterfall next to this area. However, I wanted something more visually like noticeable, and I do the wrought iron lights behind it. I've seen a couple people do that in like their dream snaps, and this is kind of what I meant when I said I was borrowing from my Forgotten Lands build. I'm putting a bunch of these zircon tiles down and you have to craft them. Another favorite part of this build was putting all the signs, and this really is when it started to feel like Wonderland, just having a bunch of these like confusing signs. And so I kind of placed them sporadically, but also trying to keep it like even, and some of them have multiple because it's like, I guess, I don't know, it just looks cool. Along with the signs and the mome raths, I'm actually going to sprinkle a couple of the singing flowers because we do have an area designated for the flowers. However, I think just adding a couple of them within the forest itself kind of brings life into the forest, and so a lot of them do have a bigger footprint, so I couldn't fit a lot of the bigger ones, but the pansy flowers that are the singing ones, they are pretty small and they have a small footprint, so they fit pretty much anywhere. And so I sprinkled mostly those ones around, and then here I'm gonna be having my little singing flower chorus, and oh my gosh, back again with the triple flowers. I told you guys last time they scared the heck out of me. I don't know why, they just look so creepy. But anyways, we're gonna make our little chorus, and so I'm trying to fit every flower that's in the Alice collection as possible, and making our little round of flowers, and they're gonna be singing for us. And I kind of try to sprinkle this bigger one here and there because I just think it's like a good space filler, and you'll see me put that also in the middle where Cheshire is. I forgot these teacups existed, so I'm just kind of putting them here and there, mostly lining the edges where, I suppose where you'll fish, because I don't know, I just kind of wanted to put them somewhere. Yeah, I forgot they totally existed until I was like nearly done with this build, so we're just gonna sprinkle here and there some razzle dazzle. And these pink anemones I also used in my Forgotten Lands build, so I'm just kind of putting them all over, and then like adding some of these purple mushrooms, and just really creating this like little magical corner that you happen to stumble by in the forest. So yeah, and then these tiles again, I think they just add so much texture without really doing anything. It's very cool. concludes our speed build. I hope you guys enjoyed it and didn't find it too chaotic, but once again, this is Wonderland, so you never know what to expect. I just want to show you real quick before we begin the walkthrough what it looks like in the daytime, and I think it looks good in any time of the day, which honestly is so rare for any of my builds, so I love it. And now I'm going to give you the tour in the nighttime where you can really appreciate all of the lights and, you know, just all of the hard work that went into this and all of the placement of everything. So yeah, without further ado, enjoy the walkthrough. I hope you guys enjoyed the build. I know I did. This was very fun to make, and I think it's just no better home for Cheshire Cat. And so yeah, this is my Wonderland. If you guys liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in part 2. Bye!